another Thursday night Facebook Live. It's really great to have folks here with us tonight. I appreciate, again, all the new members and all the folks who have suggested members. It's really been fun, and I really appreciate you continuing to identify people that you think might benefit from this community. You know, it really is very satisfying to see this group of folks who have a common interest, and that's they want to be well. They want to pursue health and wellness. They're not satisfied with the status quo. They want to be able to achieve the optimum health. And we know that that's a balance of mind, body, and spirit. We know that it's a three-legged stool, that if one of the legs is cracked or bent, then the whole stool can collapse. We have used this example many times. There's a lot of people who are physical specimens that you absolutely would love to strive for, but they're emotionally so distraught that it creates an imbalance. And I've seen many people who are spiritual giants, but they neglected their physical well-being, so they're not able to really appreciate and function like they want to in whatever purpose they have. So this idea of mind, body, and spirit, I think, is truly a comprehensive way of viewing your health and wellness. And that's what infuses this whole community. That's really the purpose behind this Women Online Wellness Facebook pages. You know, it's private. We don't have to worry about all the craziness that goes on outside of here interfering with the ability for us to interact and to be safe. And an environment that's safe online today is a very positive thing. But it's also people who are like-minded, people who are interested not just in treating illness or treating problems that arise, but more importantly, preventing them, preventing things from ever arising, trying to be well, trying to achieve that balance. So it's great to have you all here, and I'm really amazed, quite honestly, at the number of people who are not only watching these live, but also who are picking up the replays and embracing and commenting. And I promise you, I read every single comment that comes in. I really do appreciate the interaction and the comments. They keep me going, and they've helped a lot of other folks, people who have common issues that we discuss. So I just wanted to start off and tell you again how appreciative I am for this community, what you're doing for others who are part of this, and hopefully it's providing some meaning and some purpose to you. Tonight I want to really address a topic that is very timely. In fact, I get a lot of questions about this, and 3 or 4 folks actually, when I asked for suggestions, mentioned this concept of adrenal fatigue. So we're going to spend most of the evening talking about what it is, what it does, whether it's real, what to do about it, and those types of issues, mainly from the standpoint of education. And that's kind of why I'm wearing my doctor coat, because I want to add a little bit of legitimacy. So people look at this and they think, well, who's this idiot up here blustering and talking about this stuff? He doesn't even have a white coat on. Well, I got my white coat on, so I'm legitimate. I'm not a real doctor. I just don't play one on TV. So that's why I'm wearing my doctor coat tonight, to add that little extra bit of legitimacy, because I think I might make some people mad tonight. I hate to say that, but I think I may say some stuff that might irritate some folks. I'm not going to tell you what that's going to be, but I might irritate some folks. So we'll explain all that in just a minute. I wanted to take just a second and address something that's very I mean, you can't even turn on the news now and not hear something about this Wuhan coronavirus, the newest pandemic. And I wanted to just give a little bit of perspective on that, because it's something you're going to be hearing a lot about. It's something that everybody's talking about, and it's in the news, especially if you've traveled to Wuhan. I got to admit, I've not looked on a map and seen where Wuhan is. My apologies. It's somewhere in this big country called China. You all know where I'm talking about. But if you've been buried under a rock for the last 2 or 3 weeks, you know this is a virus that is thought to have started in these massive chicken markets, where, quite honestly, a bunch of these things like SARS and avian bird virus and even back to swine flu and those things. Basically, these viruses just get in these animal vectors. That's what they call these beasts that grow these viruses. And then they mutate, and occasionally they get transmitted to humans. Now, we get those viruses, these new viruses, all the time. But most of them are not what we would call pathological. They don't create illness. They just coexist, or they get eliminated by our immune system. And we've all been experiencing those over the years. Back in the early, you all know about the swine flu, SARS, Ebola, all these things that happen, get into humans, create this illness, create this sickness. And what is, I think, frightening to a lot of people with these types of viruses is that, one, they're new, so obviously we don't have any immediate treatment. We do have antivirals that will sometimes work to mollify symptoms, apparently not overly as successful with this current virus. Obviously, we don't have vaccines, although the CDC and the World Health Organization and these are rapidly putting those together. And they can be quite serious for a lot of people. You know, most folks forget that the flu virus, the regular influenza virus, which is different from a coronavirus, which is what this is, but the influenza virus actually kills upwards of 8,000 to 10,000 people a year, just last year, and it was not even a bad year. And to date, I think the last I saw was somewhere under 200, even in using the China numbers. In the U.S. now, there's been 5 cases, 6 now, because in the last day or so is the first actual documented transmission of the virus from human to human in the U.S. I believe it was a wife that was in the Wuhan province and flew back and had the virus and transmitted it to her husband. And that's the first time that's been found in the U.S., and that was just literally in the last 24 hours. Here's the bottom line. Yes, it's a scary thought that there could be a pandemic like the flu pandemic back at the turn of the century that literally killed millions of people. But we're a very different place today than we were back at the turn of the century. Not only in our technology, but in our ability to track down and to isolate carriers of this virus. It's a very, very different world. We also have 24-hour, 7-day news cycles. And I love the media because my daughter works in it, so I really like what she does anyway, local media. But I've got to say, national media has really done a job and blown this way out of proportion. I'm not downplaying the fact that there could be problems. We don't know how until this really plays out. But it's amazing the resources that have been marshaled already to make sure that in the U.S. anyway, that we don't have a widespread pandemic. And those forces were in play even before we had any cases in the U.S. I heard a great analogy the other day that trying to prevent the spread is similar to if you were a baseball player out in left field and you were trying to catch fly balls. Well, in China right now, you've got one guy out there trying to catch 50 or 100 fly balls all at once. That's a little tough. Things are going to fall through the cracks. But in the U.S., you've got one guy out there catching one ball at a time. So the ability to look at potential spread, to be able to track through contacts and to be able to monitor and isolate is absolutely the key at preventing any type of widespread panic or infection in the U.S. population anyway. The other thing to keep in mind is that while this virus is serious and people die from it, currently it's got a mortality rate of about 1% to 2%. Now that's horrible if you're in that 1-2%. But the perspective you got to keep is that 98% of folks who get this disease don't die from it. The majority of times when people die from these types of infections, they're immunocompromised, they have other medical issues, they are either very young or very old, they have a lot of breakdown of their immune system already. So I just don't want people to overreact. It's wise to be cautious. Yes, absolutely, don't travel to Wuhan. I just would not recommend that right now. If you had a business meeting in Wuhan, reschedule it. Not that critical right now. Short of that, just be smart and don't panic. Just kind of maintain what you would normally do and take normal precautions to prevent flu spread, for example. Wash hands, cover your mouth. If you are traveling and you know you're going to be around international travelers, you wear a mask. People will make fun of you and think that you have TB or something, but that's okay. You're doing it for you. But don't let the media blow this so out of proportion that you lose sleep over it. Sleep is too important. There's a lot of things out there to lose sleep over. More people die every minute from diabetes and hypertension and heart disease in this country than have ever died from any of these pandemics that have been predicted. All right, enough said. Let's go on to the topic for tonight. Hey, Judy, Deidre, Daria, Laura, Lori, Wanda, Lois, Mary Helen, Tamara. Glad you guys are watching tonight. Let's talk about adrenal fatigue. Now let's start from the beginning. So what exactly is that? If you're not familiar with that, it is a term that came into our lexicon back in 1997. It was actually coined by a fellow named James Wilson, and I know that because I got his book right here. This is the actual or first edition original book that he wrote back in 1997. Prior to 97, the term adrenal fatigue was really not around. Now, there were things that people talked about that eventually is what became adrenal fatigue, things like hypoadrenia or mild, some people referred it to mild Addison disease. So I just wanted to give you some initial perspective that this is a term that was non-existent in the medical community or the lay community until about 1997 or 1998, just to give you a little context on that. So before we get too deep into particularly what this term refers to and what it means to you, I want you to understand a little bit of the physiology. We're going to the anatomy lab, just a real bit. We're not going to get deep in the weeds, so don't leave if you don't want to hear physiology. It's important for you to understand because at your next dinner party, you'll be a hit if you just throw out some adrenal hormone talk. People will freak out. They'll love it. I guarantee it. Way to win friends and influence people. The adrenal glands are these little things about yay big that sit on top. They sit on top of the kidneys. But you know what I was just thinking, and this is probably totally inappropriate, especially since I'm wearing my white coat. But how many of you know the little what emoji that looks like poo? That looks like poop, little brown emoji that looks like poo. That's kind of what the adrenal glands look like. They kind of are shaped that way, and they just sit right on top of the kidneys. Well, what do? Well, they produce hormones. They're an endocrine gland. They produce predominantly two major hormones. They produce several, but we don't want to get in the weeds. Produce two major hormones, one called epinephrine, many people call it adrenaline, and the other one's called cortisol. Many people know that as a steroid. You've taken probably cortisone shots or used cortisone cream. That's kind of in the same family as cortisol that's produced by the adrenal glands. And what they were designed to do is this fight or flight reaction that many of you are familiar with. If you're, say, 10,000 years ago, You and Tuk were out scavenging for berries to bring back to the cave to little Tuk Jr. And all of a sudden you see a bear somewhere out there. And you know that your main job is just to outrun Tuk, because that's how you get away from the bear. If you can outrun Tuk and get back to the cave, then you're not dinner. So what happens is your brain says, we got to get out of here. So it sends all these signals to the adrenal glands to produce these hormones to allow you to outrun Tuk. Things like the epinephrine, which is that surge that you get when you're excited. When somebody comes up behind you and says, boo, you get that, your hair stands on end, you get that electric feeling. That's epinephrine. And that goes away quick. That's metabolized very rapidly. But it's necessary because it dilates your blood vessels. It gets your muscles ready to run so you can outrun Tuk so he can be dinner for the bear. And it does a bunch of other things. It mobilizes energy in your bloodstream, and it allows you to be more efficient in providing fuel. Well, you also produce cortisol. Think of cortisol as the more delayed reaction in the fight or flight. It's meant to last a little bit longer. When you're stressed, you produce the epinephrine first, the adrenaline, and then you produce the cortisol. Well, cortisol is very, very, very necessary and very helpful because it also makes it more likely for you to be able to outrun Tuk, get away from the bear, and preserve yourself. And it does a whole lot of different things in the body. And that was wonderful when we were back in caveman times and we had to survive. It was an adaptation to allow us to survive. Well, very few of us are running away from bears today. Most of us are running away from spouses or bosses or other sources of stress, we'll say. And these are more chronic stresses. Our life is one big stress in many ways. So all of a sudden, we've taken a 10,000-year adaptation to help you to achieve that safety, and we've changed what's happened, especially in the last 100 years, where we're chronically stressed day in and day out. So what happens when you're chronically stressed? The adrenals start pumping out this cortisol on a more regular basis because it thinks you're still running away from the bear. It thinks that you're just only 2 or 3 steps ahead of Tuk, where in the reality, your boss is a jerk and it just made you mad, or your husband just lost a fortune at the casino, and you're stressed out, or you're taking care of an elderly parent, and that's a day in and day out issue. Because again, we're talking about chronic long term. If you're just dealing with stress of your dog got hit by a car, I hate that and it's terrible, but you get over that and you move on. But if you're a chronic caregiver, for example, and you're chronically stressed out, you're producing all this cortisol. Well, what does cortisol do when it's produced more long term? Well, it does a number of things. We've talked in previous videos about its effect on weight. Cortisol turns off the fat burning enzymes, turns on the fat storage enzymes. So people who are chronically stressed add weight, especially around the midsection. There are 2 extremes of diseases that arise with the adrenal glands. The first is too little cortisol, and that's called Addison's disease. Many of you older folks like me remember that that's what John F. Kennedy had. He had Addison's disease, so he had to take steroids and steroid shots to be able to function normally. So too little cortisol is very dangerous, and it can be life-threatening, and it results in a multitude of diseases. You can have too much cortisol. That's called Cushing's syndrome. And literally, you could look at somebody walking down the street with Cushing's syndrome, never having met them, and be able to identify that's what they have because of the way their appearance is. They have rounded faces. They have a lot of abdominal girth, oftentimes fluid retention and swelling. So too much cortisol is a bad thing, and too little cortisol is a bad thing. So, what does all this have to do with adrenal fatigue? Well, as I said, back in 97, James Wilson, who's a chiropractor, by the way, wrote a book where he described a syndrome, which means it's a collection of symptoms, and he labeled this collection of symptoms adrenal fatigue. It was kind of a catchy name because his theory was that people who are chronically stressed eventually wear out their adrenal gland, and it doesn't produce enough cortisol to balance out and treat the reactions to stress. Well, it's a great theory, and it makes sense when you read through this, except for one small detail. There's no science to back it up. It's all anecdotal. It's all theory. It's something that he kind of created. And believe me, I want to make these caveats because I think it's important. Whenever someone's giving you their opinion, you need to know their biases. You need to know, and everybody has biases. I have biases. All of you watching have biases. And I'll say from the outset, I have always been a big believer in integrative, complementary, alternative medicine as an adjunct, as a part of holistic approach to wellness and health. If it is backed up by more than just anecdotal reports, if it's backed up by science, if it's backed up by legitimate studies that really support the science, I don't think crystals can cure anything. Neither does science. I do think acupuncture and acupressure can treat various illnesses. Now, many people will put all those things in the same category. Well, no. There is plenty of scientific evidence to support acupuncture or acupressure. So I want to make sure from the outset that you understand that I'm truly coming at this with an open mind, and I have for the past 30 years. Many of you who've known my writings in the past know that I embrace herbal medicine use, and I embrace alternative approaches, meditation, yoga, all kind of complementary approaches, but only if they're backed up by legitimate science. And luckily in the last 20 years, we've had a lot more studies looking at these. A lot of times they would use the excuse, oh, well, traditional science just doesn't look at this stuff, so we have to. Well, no, that's not the way it is. Now, we even have a national group sponsored by the government, of all people, putting money into studies. So the studies are there. The reality is there's not any legitimate science that backs up this idea of adrenal fatigue. Now, let me make very, very, very clear to everyone who's listening, especially if you have been told you have it or you're experiencing symptoms and you go on the internet and you fill out a questionnaire and it says you have adrenal fatigue. There is a big difference between having symptoms and labeling it a certain syndrome. One of the big problems people have with these types of things is they have this myriad of symptoms, and the minute you kind of package that with a name, it almost as if it takes away the legitimacy of the symptoms. And let me explain that. If someone comes in and says, I have adrenal fatigue, my first reaction is, well, let me break that down into what symptoms you have. Unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is someone will come in and say, I have adrenal fatigue, and many in the traditional world will just immediately label them as being unscientific, crazy even, and that's not fair. That's not good medicine. That's not compassionate care. That's compartmentalizing. That's just as bad as going the other side of the spectrum. if you have the symptoms associated, and I'll tell you what some of those symptoms are. If you have the symptoms associated with this label adrenal fatigue, it doesn't, by me saying adrenal fatigue is not a real syndrome, doesn't take away from the reality of the symptoms that you're experiencing. Let me make sure you heard that. I want this point to be driven home. If you are experiencing fatigue, changes in hair and skin, sleep issues, if you're experiencing one of, and I'll go through these to let you know kind of how this all works. If you're experiencing these, I am not saying by saying that adrenal fatigue is not real, I'm not saying that your symptoms are not real. Please understand that. The symptoms are real. What we need to do is really understand what's at the root cause of those symptoms, not just label it and compartmentalize it with a diagnosis that really leads us down a negative road, because that once you have a label, then automatically it puts you into a category where you need some kind of treatment. Once you create a disease, then you have to create a treatment. And unfortunately, that's what's happened in this category. Is the minute Brother Wilson here came up with this idea, he also came up with treatments. Surprise, surprise. In fact, if you go to his website today, the first banner thing that comes up on his website is not learn about adrenal fatigue, it's buy my supplements that just happen to treat adrenal fatigue. I'm just saying. All right, let me try to make that a little bit clearer. Let me say from the outset that it's evident that many of the symptoms that are attributed to this category, adrenal fatigue, are stress related. In fact, Wilson says that at the beginning of his book, is that stress is the number one cause of the multitude of symptoms that make up adrenal fatigue. Well, unfortunately, then he kind of leaves that alone and then moves toward this concept of, okay, now I have a disease, now I'm going to give you a treatment, and forgets about the underlying cause, which is the stress. So let me take this, and these are direct quotes from his book or his website. So this is not something I just pulled out of Parade magazine or somewhere. This is a direct quote, and I'm going to do a little survey. If you experience any of these things, give me a thumbs up or a heart or a like, or say yes on the feed. I would just bear with me and let's play this little game. So if you experience any of these things, let me know. You feel tired for no reason, especially in the morning and the afternoon. You have trouble getting up in the morning, even after a full night's sleep. You feel run down or overwhelmed. You have difficulty bouncing back from stress or illness. You crave salty or sweet snacks. You feel more awake, alert, and energetic after 6 p.m. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of people saying, yep, that's me. That's based on those criteria. We all have adrenal fatigue at one time or another. We've all experienced these things. One of the signs of a category label that is a red flag is when you have very nebulous, very broad symptoms that virtually you could take any 100 people at any given time, and essentially 90% of them at one point or another experience those issues. That's really kind of a red flag. Here's components. This is straight from Wilson's book. Components of a lifestyle leading to adrenal fatigue. Lack of sleep, 70% of our population. Poor food choices, 125% of our population. And I'm not throwing stones, I'm including myself in this. Using food and drinks as stimulants when tired. No, we don't use coffee or energy drinks at all. Staying up late. I'm directly quoting the book. Being constantly in a position of powerlessness, okay? Constantly driving yourself. I guess that's not like driving Miss Daisy or like car driving. I guess that's driving yourself to like a type A personality. Trying to be perfect. Staying in double binds, no-win situations, and lack of enjoyable or renewable activities. Again, my point is, this is a syndrome that was created out of the mind of one person. And it has generated a full industry. And the worst part of this whole issue is that if people gravitate to this label and they say, okay, now I have adrenal fatigue, my doctor's an idiot because he doesn't recognize that I have adrenal fatigue. I know I have adrenal fatigue. I have all these symptoms. What happens then is they go down this rabbit hole of treatment. Most of it's innocuous, and I'll tell you what a lot of the common treatments are. Some of them are not innocuous. Some of the treatments can actually be harmful. But the worst thing of all this is they begin to ignore the underlying causes of all these other symptoms. They latch on to this diagnosis, and then to the exclusion of any other evaluation, they start down this rabbit hole only to find after a while that it doesn't work. And whatever was creating the symptoms to start with that was really the problem has been ignored or maltreated. That's what angers me a little bit about a diagnosis like this. It's not so much that, I'm sure he's a nice guy, and I'm sure he's not meaning, I'm sure he's very well-meaning, and I'm convinced that people who work with folks who have adrenal fatigue in their mind are well-intentioned and well-meaning and have done some good, as I'll explain, because of the lifestyle changes. But the unintended consequences is oftentimes you end up ignoring the true underlying issues because you now have a label. I hope that makes sense. Let me explain, and again, this is a direct quote. These are direct quotes from Wilson's both book and website. And I'm quoting him constantly because, quite honestly, he is the originator of this and has done more than anybody to really identify what it is and how to go about treating it. So here is the treatment profile. Now, I gotta admit, most of this stuff is really good, but it treats everything. It's something you ought to be doing anyway. I don't have adrenal fatigue. Chances are you don't either, but you still ought to be doing a lot of this stuff. And that's another sign of questioning whether or not a syndrome label is real is, are the treatments specific for that particular problem, or would anybody feel better if they did these things? And my answer is, quite honestly, yes. Direct quote from the literature. Be in bed before 10 p.m., sleeping until 9. Look for things that make you laugh. Eliminate the energy robbers. Make your lifestyle a healing one. I'm not real sure what that means, but it sounds good. Do something pleasurable every day. Take your supplements. Ding, ding, ding. Move your body and breathe deeply. Come on, guys. This is great advice, but it's great advice for anybody. Don't label somebody with a diagnosis or a disease entity. If you've got a stress-related disorder, this stuff is great. Do it. Absolutely. No question about it. But don't think you have some kind of disease entity, and don't go down a rabbit hole and get treated for something. Spend thousands of dollars. Let me just give you a clue. I went through and looked at the regimen. This is this morning, so this is current. The book was written in 97. It's been updated a couple of times, but this is from his website this morning. If you follow the nutritional supplement regimen that he recommends, you're going to spend, on an average, from him, $300 to $400 a month. Just saying. Eat the foods your body needs. If you have fruit, have something with salt before or after the fruit. Chew well. All right? I want somebody to tell me what chewing well means. Eat an abundance of whole foods. Oh, there's another one. Chew your food well. This is not just chew well, chew your food well. I guess you're chewing cud otherwise. I don't know. Take the power and responsibility of your health into your own hands. 100%. I've said that from day one. The minute I got out of medical school, you got to be responsible. The biggest healthcare crisis in this country today is not cancer, it's not AIDS, it's not the coronavirus, it's people not making healthy lifestyle decisions. If we would get rid of cigarette, alcohol, and overeating in this country, I'd be out of a job. I'd be retired, and all I would be doing is running all day long. People are making poor health choices. That's the most dangerous problem that this country faces right now. It's not coronavirus, and it's not adrenal fatigue. Laugh several times a day, absolutely. We know that a good belly laugh is almost like 2 or 3 minutes of healthy jogging. Oh gosh, this is exhausting just reading through this. Oh, here's what you should avoid if you have this problem. Coffee, sugar, alcohol, and white flour. Getting overtired, pushing yourself, staying up past 11, being harsh or negative with yourself, feeling sorry for yourself, never skip breakfast, avoid fruit in the morning, and I could go on and on and on, but I won't, because I think I've made my point. And I want to make sure everyone understands that I am not denigrating anyone who has talked about having this issue. I'm not trying to discourage anyone from seeking answers. And I'm especially not denigrating anyone who's experiencing these symptoms and have been frustrated at not getting answers and not feeling better. There's nothing more frustrating than feeling hopeless or not seeing success when you're dealing with issues like fatigue or like sleep or like a battered immune system or poor hair, skin, and nails or difficulty concentrating or just this myriad of symptoms that have been associated with adrenal fatigue. I get it. I understand that frustration. I empathize with that. And I want to make sure that you understand this is not meant to cast aspersion on the thinking that, oh, now I have an answer. It's this adrenal fatigue. What I'm encouraging you to do is to essentially go back to square one. Find someone that you can work with that will really be honest with you and help you navigate the true source of whatever is causing these symptoms, and embrace whatever approach that is, whether it's traditional, complementary, holistic, integrative. Use whatever resources are available, but don't latch on to an artificial label or diagnosis that is only going to delay you getting better. I hope that made sense. Again, I hope I didn't, I want to make clear I didn't want to insult anyone, because it's real easy to be very passionate about some of these topics. And just as some people are very passionate about politics and very polarized about politics, believe it or not, some people can be very passionate and polarized about certain health conditions. One of the things that struck me is I went through all 13 pages in the back of his book of references. and I found one reference that he himself quoted, only one out of probably 70 or 80, that actually was a study looking at the validation of this particular problem as a true syndrome. It was a letter to the editor in a New York medical journal in 1955. That was it. Everything else was references based on kind of peripheral science that was utilized to try to put this theory together. So I've done my homework. I hope I didn't offend folks. I'm looking to see if anybody had any questions. Hey, Teresa, Nancy, Trina, Barb, Holly, Rosa, Sherry. Listen, again, you guys are so great. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I hope this is providing some benefit. Give me some thumbs up. Give me a heck yes. Give me, if you don't like it, you're an idiot and you just need to go have a makeover, or just let me know. Let me remind you too, before I sign off, February 6th, that's a week from tomorrow actually. February 6th is our Mona Lisa Touch laser open house at our office from 6:30 to 7:30. If you're having vaginal dryness, pain with intercourse, difficulty with intimacy, and want to look at options besides just hormones, it's a great way to come and get some additional information. Going to get a free copy of Holy Hormones. I'll sign it. That'll make it worth about another 10 cents on eBay. We're going to have some drawings for free treatment. You're going to get a discount on the treatment. So just remember, you have to register. We have literally about 4 or 5 spots left. So if you're interested, please click the link or call our office and register, because we have a limited number of space. So I just wanted to remind folks about that. That's all I had for tonight. Don't see, so yeah, Trina's my favorite. She knows, she is my gal when it comes to science-based integrative medicine. She knows what I'm talking about. She's my massage therapist for years and years and years, and a yoga teacher, and a wonderful, wonderful lady. So I appreciate you watching and commenting tonight, Trina. So with that, always remember, make healthy choices. See you next time.